You're listening to Achtung Millwall, broadcasting from the beautiful South Birmingham. Accept no substitute.
Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to another impromptu edition of Achtung Millwall. Joining me is a very welcome new guest. It's Mr. Jim Lucas. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Cheers, Nick. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Long-time listener. Certainly not contributed or anything like that, but glad to be involved and hopefully we can have a good chat.
Well, I've hooked Jim into my world of Achtung Millwall, so that you will be hearing more from him, I hope, over the course of the season. But Jim, we're speaking today, obviously, in the continuing sad circumstances of the loss of James Berylson 10 days ago. Now I'm just looking at the date on the computer. That's 10 days. It seems still seems a bit surreal, mate. I don't know how you found at least this past period. It's very odd. We were just saying off air, weren't we?
Yeah. I mean, I must admit I did the same thing as you in terms of how long has it been now, and it has been a very long period. I think it's felt a long time. There's obviously been a lot of probably emotion, angst among the fan base. Everybody really kind of, on one hand, I think processing grief and sadness as a fan base and so on and so forth, but also in the background, probably not something you want to necessarily verbalise and talk about, but probably concern and wonder, I guess, in terms of what happens to the club next and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, look, I'm a Millwall fan. I've felt it. I think everybody has really. I went to the Den last Friday, so yeah, a week ago, and seeing, you know, what those who've been down there
tributes
managed to do. Yeah, mate. I mean, amazing. And I think I said on Twitter, it has always been what the club does best and the fan base does best, around difficult times for an individual fan or the club, etc., etc. The club has just got a brilliant way of dealing with some of the saddest and hardest situations, really. So, getting to see that was nice. And hopefully, I think, I'm sure we'll come on to it, the new chairman today, the new statement, I think helps us, kind of now move into the next phase, really, of what I think everybody's been thinking about and processing over the last week or so.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, obviously, Jim and I are speaking as a follow-along listeners to the official statements on the club website. I'm sure you will have seen it by the time we get this show out, but if you haven't, it's on the millfc.co.uk official website, announcing that that the new chairman, now that JB is no longer with us, will be his son James Berylson, who has been on the board since 2010. Jim, which I must admit that passed me by slightly. So he's been around a long time in the boardroom or involved in the club, but I thought it was a really, really strong statement, really well worded, and really what's that word I was searching? It was leadership, I suppose, because it does have a calming effect. I mean, like many fans, many listeners, yourself and myself, you do wonder what the future holds. We've seen what instability at the Den looks like in the past, and the loss of such a figure as JB is, you don't know where it's going to take you to. But this does have a certain calming influence. So, how did you find it, Jim?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Reassuring, I think, was certainly the feeling I took from it. Look, as I kind of alluded to at the start, it's 10 days, which is not a long time, I don't think, when it comes to losing somebody. But equally, as I mentioned, those are 10 days where you do start to wonder in terms of what's going to come next. So hopefully this statement, which, as you said, was calming, I think, was very clear and strong in its message, that, James, John's son, is clearly going to take on the club and run it, hopefully, in his father's image, running it in the direction that his father wanted to run it. And as you said, if he's been on the board since 2010, he's had a good first-hand view of what that's been like. I mean, I don't think we could have asked any more from it.
No, I'd agree with that.
It gives us all of the answers to the questions I think we might be asking. As you say, I mean, I remember I was obviously working for the local paper around that time. I remember him coming onto the board, and it was a pretty low-key announcement, I think, at the time. In fact, I think there were a couple of additions to the board. Another one of who I assume is one of John's friends came onto the board around the same time, and I think he's still on the board. I don't know how active or involved they might be, but obviously then James, Jimmy came on around the same time. And I think there's been another American investor, I think, came on last year at some point. So you can see that John's probably been gradually kind of bringing the people he knows and people that know him onto that board. So that can only bode well, I think, in terms of, if we were in a situation where he was literally on his own as the only involved person in that family, or the only involved person from even America in the board, then it might have been a bit more of a scary situation, I think, for all of us. But yeah, as you said, the words and the fact that it is him taking over the chairmanship, I think, can only be something that hopefully allays any fears that fans might have had.
Absolutely. I mean, as I've said, listeners, it's a really well worded statement. I want to take my hat off to whoever drafted that, because it's, it hits the right note. Absolutely. And it also has a quality of obviously expressing the family's feelings for Millwall Football Club. There's one, I've only picked out a couple of quotes for you, but it describes, in fact, it's the end quote as it closes, it describes the James Berylson coming in as chair now as the start of a new era, which I think, is exactly what we all would have wanted to see there, Jim. He says he wants to strive to fulfil his dad's legacy. And that legacy was, of course, to try to build and develop the club into a body that can aim for the highest level. That was still a work in progress. We've got the training ground that's being constructed out in Kent, out in Brands Hatch, but I think that idea of building for the future, which was very much John Berylson's purpose, I'm really glad to see, seems to be something that James wants to fulfil. A tribute to his dad, I guess, that would be one way to put it. But he also expresses the family's love of Millwall. I mean, it's a strange romance, but I'm really glad we've got it.
We've all fallen for it somewhere. Then, I agree. It is great to see that John, I guess, has been able to pass that through to his family, because I'm sure, a hard sell, right? For an American investor who potentially maybe took this interest on his own, to pass that love and affinity through to his family, who may not have that natural hook. No. That's a great testament to him, that he's been able to pass that through to his son, through to his wife, who came to games with him, and so on and so forth. Absolutely that. And I think the point you make around the training ground is a good one, because that is quite clearly going to be, the Berylson legacy, the Berylson contribution, I think, to the next stage of this club, really. And if you do a bit of digging around in terms of that family and what they've done on the other side of the Atlantic, that's been a bit of their trademark, if you like. I think there's a couple of university sports facilities that have been contributed to financially by the family, and have then taken on the name of the family, and so on and so forth. So, I think all of us are probably in the same place regarding that training ground and what it might be called when it does come to fruition. But yeah, that's a great legacy, but also a great indicator, I think, of the way they may see their investment in this club going forward.
There's a fascinating obituary. Jim and I were just speaking about it before we started recording, listeners. It's on the Boston Globe newspaper, American newspaper, but they've got an obituary of John Berylson. It gives a really fascinating image of the man. We only really, football is a cartoon world, in my opinion. You only get one-dimensional images of people. I mean, in a totally different direction. I watched the Dele Alli interview yesterday, which now, it gives you a sense of depth of the person. This obituary in a different direction gave me a sense of depth of John Berylson. As you say, he and his family are clearly very wealthy individuals, but they believe, I believe, in what was once called philanthropy, giving away money to assist others, and I'm so glad their eyes fallen upon our little club in Bermondsey, because the alternatives, as we see around the football scene, Jim, you've got the likes of Southend struggling at the moment. Bury have struggled and gone out of existence, but but for John Berylson and his involvement, it would be very hard to have seen a future for Millwall Football Club. I mean, you never know what else might happen, but he brought such stability. It's so reassuring. This statement is so reassuring to see that stability continue in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting when you talk about the philanthropy side of things. Were we a philanthropic cause from the start? Were we an investment? I'm sure we're definitely closer to philanthropy as the
It's become
investments had to
so.
continue, and the underwriting beyond probably all sense, I'm sure has kind of has had to kick in. But yeah, I mean, thankfully that is the way they are by the looks of things. They're able to be philanthropic. And that quite clearly is the way they're going to carry on doing things. So, yeah, we're incredibly lucky, as you say. It's best not thinking about the alternative, I don't think.
No, I agree.
But yeah, fantastic to kind of have that assurance, I guess, that they'll continue to do things in the way they have.
Interesting also, just reading James Berylson's statement here, listeners, he speaks of him witnessing some incredible moments of joy, drama and success at the Den. We joke a lot, Jim, about what is it that attracts people to the Den. I think it attracts a certain type of personality. I think you have to have some measure of underdog spirit, or whatever the other words you want to choose. But I think to our eternal credit, we do inspire a certain dramatic kind of we inspire dramatic moments at the Den. They can be very addictive, and I think it's interesting to read this statement because James, I don't know him, so I'm not going to call him Jim.
I think he is a Jim. I think he is a Jim. To be fair, I'm sure I've heard him.
Let me introduce him as Jim. He's James because it's inappropriate to be familiar. But it's interesting that he seems to have caught the Millwall bug, as the expression goes. It can be a very addictive thing once you catch it. So long may that continue. Yeah, I mean, looking forward, obviously, there's the training ground is clearly the route that the club will look to try and develop, because that offers a way of survival, really, Jim. I mean, we've seen the success that the under-21s had back in May, winning their portion of the Premier League competition. And we've seen too many players in the past that have escaped our clutches. I mean, I'm thinking of Etse, who plays for England now, doesn't he? Who was a Millwall player and got away from us, and others. Making the most of who we are, I think, is the correct route, and it's John Berylson's chosen route, and I think that comes together quite nicely, mate.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think having a, as you say, a personality and a reason for coming to the club because of what we stand for is great. But also having excellent facilities is also great, and the two are not mutually exclusive. I think anybody who's been to the current training ground will know that it probably doesn't stack up against some of the other ones in the top half of the English Football League, let alone in the Premier League. So having an excellent facility, which from looking at the plans and so on, it seems to be, as well as staying true to our ethos and what we are and who works for us as a signing and who doesn't. I think it gives us the best of both worlds, really. I mean, funnily enough, I saw a couple of interviews this week with players who joined Championship clubs. I saw Jerry Yates, I think it was, who's joined Swansea, the striker from Blackpool. Walking into Swansea's training ground, talking about how amazing it was to come into this new facility and it's a proper training ground and blah blah blah. A couple of days before that, I'd seen a player who'd gone from Swansea to Southampton walking in saying exactly the same thing about moving from Swansea to Southampton. So it kind of shows where we are probably in the pecking order of Championship football club facilities, and the fact it does have a bearing on a new signing deciding to come to your club or not. So I don't know how far off it is, that training ground, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, I think potentially, but that will without doubt help us attract players to the club. So again, that's in their legacy. I think that if they can sort of take us onto that level through that facility, then that's brilliant.
It's a long-term investment in the future. Trademark of John Berylson. It's also been interesting. I'm just reading on the London News Online. It's an interview with Steve Cavanaugh, who went over to the funeral in Boston, and obviously to meet James Berylson and the family. It's an interesting interview, and one thing I wanted to say while I'm speaking to you, Jim, is I think the club, and by that I mean the staff, Steve Cavanaugh, Billy Taylor, and others, everyone at the club, have done really well this week, because it's talk about a difficult situation to be plunged into in what must be, you'd normally think of as early July has been a pretty easy time in the football world. Nothing much going on. You're planning your holidays, all this kind of thing. But to suddenly be plunged into a situation that I've never had anything like it in my Millwall time, 50 plus years. They've done it really well, and they've handled what is both a professional but also the friendship. I mean, the personal tragedy from their point of view. To have handled it this well, I think, is a real tribute to the club. It gets a lot of stick, and it's easy sometimes to knock Millwall, but I think we take it for granted a little bit how good they can be when these moments arise.
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of said at the start, this is the club in a nutshell for me. I think that we can all, and I'm sure we all do, take short-term frustrations at things the club does and could do and should do better and so on and so forth. But when you see, as you said, kind of amid a very personally challenging time for some of those people working the leadership of the club, for the way that, for example, I don't know how it all played out, but obviously we got the news at whatever it was, 9:30, 10 o'clock. But the fact that they then had a book of condolence up the next morning, that they'd managed to get Albins, I think, to come in and set up the tribute internally inside the stadium and so on and so forth. For any of us who in our working lives have had to juggle a personal trauma with the need to carry on working, I think we can all kind of appreciate that cannot have been easy for the people who run this club.
100%.
And it's a small, tight-knit football club. You compare it to the leadership and the size of the board and the senior management at even another championship club. This is a relatively small staff that therefore gets a hell of a lot more exposure to the owner, to the chairman, to one another in terms of the time they'll spend with each other. So I've always said that this club is fantastic at doing and dealing with some of the hardest subjects. Immediately your mind goes back to the way they dealt with the sad death of Paul Jiggins, for example, 18 months ago, and they did a brilliant job there. The way that young fans have sadly died, and the way they always rally around, and they put the little girl up on the screen in one of the games last season, and so on. And even Isla, the young West Ham fan, the club has, and the people who run the club have a fantastic, for me, I guess it's a moral compass, I think, an understanding of the modern society and how to wrap around people and how a club can wrap around people. In this instance, the club was having to wrap around itself. And I just, as you said, I've got enormous respect for the way they've been able to do what they've done over the last week. And as you kind of pointed out at the start, probably carry on around a very stressful time for the club. Pre-season friendlies, the team was out in Spain. They're probably trying to sign players. I'm sure they are. To be dealing with running the club, as well as dealing with the situation they've dealt with, I think it's massive credit to them. And I hope that credit takes us through the season. It may turn out turn out to be a tough season. I'm sure that we'll always face ups and downs. A club of our size, a team of our depth, I guess. I think the club hopefully has earned a lot of goodwill, I think, from the fans over this week, and also potentially in the opposite direction. I think that the club, I'm sure, will have liked the way the fans have responded and the tributes at the stadium, etc., etc. So I hope, in the saddest of circumstances, the last week probably gives us all a bit of unity, togetherness between club and fan base, really, that if the stars align, might well serve us pretty well this year. But if they don't, hopefully, keeps us going through some tricky times.
Yeah, I mean, there was a story on I think it was on the main website with the players coming over from their training week in Spain, being taken to the den to see the tributes. I think the club have done really well because not only as we've said, they're dealing with their own personal feelings, but they're also being a channel by which the grief of many thousands of people can be expressed. That's no easy task. Anyone that's ever done anything like it in their personal lives will know how difficult funerals can be. So to have done that so well, I think it's hats off. I also want to mention the players who have said posted some nice messages and quotes. They're going to give everything, which you would expect. One never expects less than 100%, but in these circumstances, I think it has redoubled power.
I think also just one thing I'd probably add to that is what would be interesting is whether the way the fans have responded, and I think it does come through in the statement today, the way the fans have responded has hopefully confirmed, if they were in any doubt, the strength of feeling that this fan base had for John, and therefore, just at least showing that family what he meant and what he'd done to this fan base. Really, I hope in some way that's been noticed, and I'm sure they've had a lot on their plate, to be honest. I hope that in some way that then has led to the strength of statement you've seen today from James, the new chairman. So it felt like there was a point and a reason, certainly, for going to the Den and paying tribute, etc. It was to try and hopefully show John's family just how much of good feeling there was here for him, and I think hopefully he had that feeling. We've all seen the round the pitch. What do you call it? Wonder.
The kind of the applause.
Yeah,
the end of the season.
I'm sure he was in no doubt as to the strength of feeling from the fan base towards him. But you never know just whether that's passed through to the family. But I'm hoping that as you say, after the last 10 days and the lengths that fans have gone to show their feeling towards John, I hope that's made its way through to the family. I'm sure it has.
I mean, I'm just looking at the report, the story that Steve Cavanaugh went over to the funeral. He said he's met with James Berylson. He's been to his apartment. And I think probably when he's been on the board, he's got big shoes to fill here, listeners. And it's no easy task, Jim, is it, to be a chairman of a championship level football club? It's... reading John's obituary, he's clearly a businessman of some talent. He's been involved in a lot of different types of business out there. But it's a very different thing being a football club brings you a kind of a public role that being, I read he was on the board of Vision Express. Well, that's a big company, probably way bigger than Millwall.
You don't have people coming down to the front door waving their glasses at you when they're unhappy, though. I'm afraid. So
well, it doesn't give you the public profile. I mean, I know that's why many nowadays we see many wealthy people from many different backgrounds who try and skirt around some of it diplomatically, want the profile of owning a major football club. So there is certainly value to be gained in that way. But for the most part, it's a relatively small business compared with some of the others that he's been involved in, and yet the profile of it is massive numbers of times larger than, say, being on Vision Express or some financial fund of some sort. It doesn't really compare. So I think that's going to be James Berylson's big learning curve. The fact that he's clearly a businessman in his own right, but he's stepping into some big shoes and with a club that has a profile. It's a very different ball game, isn't it?
It is, and look, what we don't know, and the statement is very, very clear and strong and shows great leadership. We don't know how he's going to want to do this. We don't know how involved. We don't know how involved he's going to want to be. I think anybody who's expecting a direct replica of his father is going to be wrong. I'm sure he's going to have a different way of wanting to do things. To be honest, this is not an unfamiliar situation for football clubs. We've seen this a couple of times, haven't we? We've seen Leicester's owner sadly died and his son took over, and I'm sure there were differences between the way that his son ran the club or owned the club compared to his father. So Southampton went through a similar thing when their owner died in sort of 2009, 2010, and then his daughter took on the club and did things differently, I'm sure. So I wouldn't, and this is 100% too early to be speculating around things like this, but I wouldn't just assume that the club is run in exactly the same way that it was run, 2 weeks ago, etc. I think I'm sure that there will be changes. But in terms of a first message, you can't get any more encouraging than the one we've seen today, I think.
No, this has been very sure-footed, so it's a great start. You're right. I mean, I think anyone expecting, Mark II of John Berylson, I think, is probably going to be mistaken. And James will bring his own ideas. He's a younger man. He's come from a different, worked in a different working world, perhaps, to his dad. So let's see. What I do take great comfort from, listeners, is another sentence I picked out of the official statement. James says he's fiercely determined and passionate about continuing John Berylson's work and building on his foundation, which is really all I think, Jim, we can all have asked for. So that's wonderful. It's been a bit of a debate. Before I let you go, mate, I just wanted to get your take. A lot of talk about naming things after John and statues and things of that kind. Renaming roads, which isn't easy, believe me, listeners. I mean, do you have any thoughts? I suppose the obvious one is the away end, but that doesn't seem quite.
Yeah,
Can't
I
quite
don't
do
like
it.
that. No, I'm not.
No,
I'm not a fan of that one. I think that stand doesn't have a name for a reason, to be honest. And
it's where the away fans go.
yeah,
Even better.
exactly that. You know, yeah, who cares about that stand? Frankly, I'll take all that back. By the way, if they end up doing it. Yeah, you know, where do I stand on it? I'm not completely against the stadium one, which I know has kind of it got a lot of emotional support in the first couple of days, and then I think sense
Renaming the
kicked in. And
den. Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
I probably am. You know, I do understand that. I think that would have presented difficulties, to be honest, in terms of if one day they wanted to sell some sponsorship naming rights of the stadium, which possibly
Yeah,
has been on the table before. You
maybe
know,
that's going to be James's idea. I mean,
yeah, maybe, and I'm sure they've explored it, and whether it was for the want of trying it, it's never happened. But I'm sure
yeah,
the idea of the Husky Den or whatever it might be has never been too far. So, you know, renaming the stadium after John might have made that a little bit more difficult. So I think that one probably is a non-starter. The training ground made sense, you know,
yeah.
before John passed. If I'm honest with you, I would have expected the training ground to hopefully have been at least in some form named in tribute to John and to the family. I think that is an absolute surefire bet at this stage that the training ground, the new training ground, will be
Yeah, yeah,
named after
yeah.
him and the family. And then when it comes to the stadium, I'm not sure. I think a statue would be great. I think it's a little bit of what the stadium actually does lack, a little bit of that. You know, you
Personality in a sense. Yeah,
yeah, just
yeah.
a little bit of that, a little bit of that. And look, you know, we know that the footprint of the stadium is under threat, and therefore maybe
Mm.
building a statue might not be the right thing. But I like that. I'm not a fan of taking the name off of the free stands that are there.
Mm.
I understand, and I think I've seen you mention it online that maybe renaming the Dockers might make some sense.
Mm.
But it's been named that for a reason, and I don't like the idea of backtracking on naming a stand that's already been dedicated to someone, really. But I think there's options. The training ground makes a lot of sense because that genuinely is and will be 100% his and the Burleson family's legacy.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
you know, a statue wouldn't go amiss, that's for sure.
No. Well, let's wait and see on that. Incidentally, just on a tangent, I just want to say well done, thank you, finally to the club. We've got the issue of the plaques which were held up. Anyone that's followed this little drama online know that they were with the company that were fitting personal family plaques went out of business. They were difficult to track down. Anyway, the club has handled it now, and I understand they've been fitted. So big thank you, Millwall Football Club, because that wasn't an easy situation either. And you know, in the aftermath of everything else that's been going on, it's another thing that's been done well in the end. It got there. So we'll be doing something about our Bob Hunter plaque another day, but not right now. Jim, big thank you for coming on Achtung Mill. It's been great talking to you, mate.
My pleasure. No, I've enjoyed it. I think it's been a very difficult time for the club, and I think it's good for everybody to have the chance, I think, to reflect on what it's been like. It's been pretty unique for everybody, so I've enjoyed having a bit of a chance to do that, really. And then looking ahead now, hopefully, I think there's
New season, Gillingham tomorrow, mate.
Yeah, there's a friendly. I'm going to give that one a swerve. I don't think I want to go back there anytime soon. But no, I'm looking for. I think to be honest, Nick, it's all tied into the conversation, right? Is that I think there's a bit of a line in the sand, hopefully, been drawn with the statement today. I think friendlies to come, hopefully a new kit, potentially a signing or two. I think it's
The football
it's a
can
good time.
begin now, Jim, can't it?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And to be honest, I saw in Steve Cavanagh's piece that one of the considerations has obviously been that John's wife Amy is Jewish, and there is a process to work through when it comes to the kind of grieving process.
A week's mourning takes place.
Yeah,
apparently.
exactly that. So you can understand why maybe it's just been a little low key this week. But it feels like, friendly tomorrow, new statement, new chairman today. Hopefully, as I said, a signing or two and a new kit. It feels like we can all look forward, but in the right way, I think, at this stage. So yeah, mate, I've really enjoyed kind of being able to chat through some of that with you today.
Well, I'm breaking the habit of a lifetime. Listeners know I don't do friendlies, but I'm actually going to have bought the stream. I've bought a £5 stream to watch it tomorrow, so I'll try and get a show to you on Sunday, dear listeners, analysing what we see that takes place at the Priestfield Stadium. So Till then, I want to say a big thank you to Jim. Incidentally, listeners, if you want to come on the show, then do what Jim did to get on the show, which is see me coming out of Reading and drive past me. Not say hello. That's the method. That's the method.
I was
Jim,
gonna,
to get
I
on
was gonna
Achtung
tell
Millwall.
everybody that I was gonna say that you asked me, Nick. You've just kind of ruined the illusion of my desperation to get my voice heard. Definitely get in touch if you want to get involved. I'm sure.
Nice one. Big thank you, Jim Lucas. Thank you to listeners for listening to this impromptu edition of Achtung Millwall. Till Sunday, probably, when we talk about Gillingham. Until then, it's Arrivederci Millwall. Bye for now.
Achtung, Millwall.